Welcome back to Savvy Psychologist. I'm Dr. Ellen Hendrickson, and I'll help you meet life's challenges with evidence-based research, a sympathetic ear, and zero judgment. Failure to launch. It may be a 2006 Matthew McConaughey movie given 1 star by Roger Ebert, but more often, it's the growing phenomenon of young adults not making the transition to adulthood. Now, in most Western countries, young adults are expected to leave the nest. And while they may need a finite amount of time to launch themselves, ultimately, the goal of everyone involved is to see the young adult fly on their own. But when young adults stay at home, don't search for a job or contribute financially, and begin to withdraw from the world, we have the foundation of failure to launch. Add unrealistic goals, blaming others for their situation, and a lack of motivation to change, and liftoff is almost sure to be grounded. In the US, failure to launch is also known as Peter Pan syndrome, after the famous story of the boy who never grows up. In Japan, a more extreme but related condition is called hikikomori. Described as modern hermits, hikikomori generally withdraw from society before they hit their late 20s and can remain in the bedroom equivalent of a remote mountaintop cave for years, if not decades. Now, no matter the culture or the label, failure to launch cases are mostly, but not all, young men, and numbers indicate the problem is increasing. Indeed, in 2014, over 7 million American men ages 25 to 54 were not working nor looking for work, up 25% from 10 years prior. And while the stereotype of a basement-dwelling man-child evokes labels of loser, dropout, or other unflattering descriptors, the phenomenon is more complicated than pejorative labels might indicate. So why is all this happening? Well, ask a dozen experts and you'll get a dozen answers. The economy, the number and kind of jobs available, an unwillingness to take on education debt that can't be paid off by lower-level jobs, the decline of rites of passage to adulthood, and the falling frequency of marriage. All these things may be keeping young adults at home, but the defining feature of failure to launch is foot dragging, delaying, stalling, or flat-out refusal to participate in life. While some young adults living at home are trying mightily to move out, Peter Pans have little intention of getting off the launch pad. Now, I will leave reshaping the economy to others, but possible psychological reasons an adult child comes out of his room only to ask what's for dinner? We can do that. So here are 3 reasons your Peter Pan may be retreating to Neverland. Reason number 1 is pathological perfectionism. Peter Pans can put on a show of confidence while feeling deeply insecure. They're often bright, articulate, and talk a good game while offering lots of reasons why they can't move forward, from unfair professors to a-hole bosses. They may plan for the future, but goals are often grandiose, like starting an industry-disrupting company, directing films, or launching a viral app, all of which could technically be done from somewhere besides a childhood bedroom. In addition, Peter Pans often follow these dreams superficially, taking a class here or applying for an internship there, but generally remaining dabblers. And finally, some Peter Pans come across as slacker slobs while actually caring deeply about success and appearances. A Peter Pan you know may look like he gets his wardrobe from the bottom stratum of a Lost and Found, and his hairstyle may be a dead ringer for James Franco in Pineapple Express, but deep down, he thinks he should be making 6 figures and driving a Tesla. Why is this? Well, from celebrity culture to hashtag goals to billionaires in their 20s, the expectation of perfection is all around us. When cultural messages tell young people they're supposed to be founding unicorn startups in their dorm room, or at least living their best life, they may think there's no viable alternative. Now, the unflattering way to frame pathological perfectionism is to say that Peter Pans aren't willing to work their way up, that they want to start out in the corner office and therefore turn down perfectly honest jobs they think are beneath them. But another way to frame it is expectations gone awry. Kids grow up being told they can do anything, but when they inevitably run into obstacles, they might conclude that the reason lies with them, that setbacks mean they are a failure. So rather than continuing to struggle and take further hits to the ego, it's easier to blame others. Once and future bosses are cast as ogres, People are described as annoying, and eventually, staying in a bedroom gets framed as freedom. So regardless of whether you frame it as a personal problem, a societal issue, or both, pathological perfectionism keeps many Peter Pans paralyzed, yet comfortable. After all, it's easier to dream big from the couch than to face potential failure in real life. Reason number 2 is an emphasis on safety and security. Now, many Peter Pans have had comfy, privileged lives, while others have been through the ringer and never really got a childhood. But regardless of background, Peter Pans emphasize and value safety. But when we whittle down threats to our egos, there's a trade-off, best summed up in the words of Dory in Finding Nemo. Well, you can't never let anything happen to him, then nothing would ever happen to him. Moving into adulthood carries with it big changes and potential risks. Getting and keeping a job, living independently, finding a relationship, creating a social life, there are thousands of ways to struggle. And retreating from the world takes away these threats. It keeps us safe. Peter Pans get to avoid these challenges of growing up. But there's a psychological trade-off. Staying safe all the time sends the message that we are easily broken or damaged. In other words, weak. And when we think of ourselves as weak, we are prone to seeing ourselves as victims of unfairness, of a hostile world, of demons from our past. It puts a barrier between us and a willingness to take age-appropriate risks. We stay stuck. Reason number 3 is video games. And hear me out on this one. I know it's not as simple as blaming video games for failure to launch. The relationship between video games and young men is complex and not quite understood by curious scientists. But when you spot a Peter Pan in the wild, his natural environment often includes video games. So to shed some light on this, let's turn to a fascinating study in the journal Psychiatry Research that compared 19 young men and women who played World of Warcraft an average of 24 hours a week, with 19 additional young men and women who didn't play the game at all. Now, the researchers instructed the participants to play a computerized dice game and to make as much fake money as possible. And the odds and amounts of winning were clear. So for instance, they might have been told that they had a 1 in 6 chance of winning 1,000 euros or a 4 in 6 chance of winning 100 euros. And played strategically, the players could make slow, steady, but pretty much guaranteed money, or they could take big risks and make bank or lose it all. So what happened? Well, the World of Warcraft players consistently made what the researchers called, quote, disadvantageous decisions. They chose the riskiest alternatives significantly more frequently, and the safest alternatives significantly less frequently than the non-World of Warcraft players, a finding seemingly at odds with a preference for security we talked about before. So as always, more research is needed. But next, the study also found that frequent World of Warcraft players had more mental health problems than non-players. Anxiety, hostility, paranoia, interpersonal sensitivity, everything was worse in the World of Warcraft group except depression, which was equal in both. Now, the researchers noted that this mix was similar to what's seen in pathological gambling and substance abuse. And it's important to note that it's unclear if there's an element of impulsivity or risk-taking that draws people to heavy use of video games, if extended video game use has an impact on those characteristics, or both. Regardless, the researchers concluded that the World of Warcraft players had what they dubbed a, quote, myopia for the future, preferring to keep playing as their mental health and social life crumbled around them. So what to do? If your adult child has recently upped his White Russian consumption a la the dude in The Big Lebowski, here are 3 things to try, especially before a marmot ends up in his bathtub. Method number 1 is question the goals. If a Peter Pan thinks his only option is to make Fortune's 40 under 40 list, it's easy to get paralyzed. And while it's good to dream big and aim high, remind him that being an instant 1%er isn't a minimum requirement. Getting VC funding isn't the only way to achieve success and is totally optional when it comes to having a meaningful life. So dare your Peter Pan to be average. Send the message that it's okay to live a normal life. Now, sometimes this lowers the pressure and creates room to move forward. However, sometimes lowering expectations can backfire. It can feel like pulling teeth to get them to enroll in one class, to encourage them to volunteer 3 hours a week, or to get out of bed before noon. Why? From their perspective, if they fail at the small things, what does that say about them? In a way, lowering the bar is threatening because what if they can't clear it? Therefore, rather than lowering the bar within the same context, the answer is to change the context. Method number 2 is just say no to enabling. Peter Pans don't exist in a vacuum. They live in a neverland populated with people who unwittingly contribute to a failure to launch. Because being a Peter Pan is a pretty sweet deal. It's safe and comfortable, and who wants to leap from safety and comfort into the unknown, where the only guarantee is eating a lot of microwave ramen? At home, Peter Pan doesn't have to think about how he will support himself and where he will live. He outsources that responsibility to others who accept it. They may accept it begrudgingly or resentfully, but they accept it nonetheless. Therefore, there's no incentive other than salvaging his self-esteem for Peter Pan to change the situation. Okay, how to change this? Well, the most effective option is to stop funding Peter Pan's expenses. Charge for rent, food, utilities, or all of the above. Set a move-out date. And of course, don't do these things without warning. Talk to your Peter Pan about why you're doing this and hold firm. Be a broken record when he protests. Agree with him when he says it's his life, but make clear he needs to start contributing to it. Okay, next, what if it doesn't work? Well, if your Peter Pan clearly understood the agreement, is a few months into non-payment, and still isn't willing to make a change, up the ante and arrange for a humane eviction. You're not hiring goons to throw his stuff on the sidewalk. Instead, give him a timeline and set a moving day a few weeks away. Rent a storage space and arrange to have his stuff taken there on the appointed day. Hopefully, he'll make other arrangements before the deadline, but if not, he'll couch hop until that gets old. And if that sounds harsh, it brings us to method number 3. Play the long game. When you shake things up, there will probably be a big reaction. Maybe anger, maybe guilt, maybe blaming you, maybe some temporary rejection. But remember, you're playing a long game. Changing the game is hard. A lot of parents worry their Peter Pan will hate them if they insist on increased financial responsibility or set a move-out date. And he might, at first. He will try to prove to you how mean you are and how much you are hurting him. But remember the marmot that gets thrown in the dude's bath? It flails and makes a big fuss, but ultimately lands on its feet. And that is the goal. So keep your eye on the horizon. All in all, when an adult child stays glued to the couch, it's time to change the game. Make it clear that life can be lived outside a childhood bedroom. Just like the human immune system goes haywire in an environment that's too clean, developing brains can't mature in an environment that's too safe. We all need to be exposed to age-appropriate stressors and challenges in order to become strong, capable adults. You may have to wait a few months or even a few years after he leaves the nest, but eventually, your Peter Pan will likely thank you. In the end, while it's tempting to write Peter Pans off as losers, the real reasons are more layered than a teenager's pile of laundry. But play the long game, just say no to enabling, and hold on for the day when you can say, we have liftoff. Savvy Psychologist is audio engineered by Steve Rickyberg and edited by Beata Santora. As always, Savvy Psychologist is strictly for informational purposes and doesn't substitute for mental health care from a licensed professional. If you read my book, How to Be Yourself, Quiet Your Inner Critic, and Rise Above Social Anxiety, please consider leaving a brief review on Amazon. It is super helpful and helps others find the book. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next week for a happier, healthier mind.